If everyone kind of plays a role in this conviction, and to them it's nothing they did wrong. It's like, everyone has like, well, just a little thing, and they all have to kind of sit with what that actually, like, it might seem like a small part,
Mhm,
but it all kind of leads collectively to the same thing.
mhm. Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks To interview, where our guest today is Megan Miranda. This is a return guest, so we're really happy to have her back, whose latest book is Such a Quiet Place. And this place is anything but quiet. As soon as you see a title like that coming up from Megan Miranda, no, that is not exactly what's happening. So let's start with you telling us about Such a Quiet Place.
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me back. I'm always so excited to chat with you. So, my new book, Such a Quiet Place, is set in this really close-knit, idyllic community where everyone believes they know everything about one another. And of course, this isn't true. And this neighborhood really had the foundation shaken about a year and a half earlier when the couple next door to the main character were found killed. And the neighbors all worked together to piece together their security footage, their doorbell cameras, and they kind of collectively were able to figure out who did it. And it led to the conviction of one of their own, a woman named Ruby, who is the main character's roommate, or was at the time. But the book begins a year and a half later, just as Ruby's conviction is overturned, and she comes right back to this neighborhood and right back into the home that she shared with Harper, and it just shakes everyone up again. And there's really no good answer. No one's really sure if she's innocent or guilty. And if she's guilty, killer's back in their community. And if she's innocent, then presumably a killer has been there all along.
And everybody is completely upended. It's like Ruby's back, and it's like, oh, this is just not going to go well. You usually start with a character or relationship that develops alongside an idea. And I was thinking Ruby was the person this time. Am I right? Did I nail it?
You are right. And I think that's something that hasn't been the case for me in the past. I usually the first character who kind of comes to me fully formed is the main character. And this was different. And when I was actually pitching the beginning of this idea, I think I even had in there like, and the book's going to start with, there was no party the day Ruby Fletcher came home, which is really unusual that it actually ended up being the first line of the book,
Right.
after all of the drafts. But I really just was thinking about this character who was a little larger than life, and also thinking what kind of character would come back to this place that convicted her and thinks she's the killer. And so I kind of started with her, although I knew she wasn't going to be the narrator because I wanted that uncertainty of, her roommate not knowing, is she innocent or guilty?
Yeah. But I just picture this woman marching back into town, and yeah, we'll get into exactly the way they all started typing to each other, which I found was so funny. So what appealed to you about writing? It's really like not locked room, it's locked box, it's locked neighborhood kind of a story where it's happening all there. All the action is happening there. There are little tangential things that happen outside, but it's the lake, the pool, and their homes, and that's about it.
That is it. And it was a little different than other books I've written, which, I love small towns. I love exploring dynamics in small towns where you have the layer of everyone who thinks they know everything about one another and then kind of shaking that foundation. And I've been thinking a long time about wanting to set a thriller or a mystery inside a neighborhood. And I think about it like pulling those boundaries even tighter, just like you were saying, sort of a locked box, even though there are roads in and out. I mean, once you have the security footage, you kind of know this is the cast, like this is the world right here. This is who's come in and out. And it was kind of a challenge to try and work within those parameters, but it still kind of draws on those same themes that I'm just always drawn to over and over, these tense dynamics between the relationships and the characters, a place that seems idyllic, but then when something, it shatters a little, how does that,
Mhm.
what's kind of hidden under the surface here?
Yeah, what happens to those people when, oh, perfection is not here? It is not happening. So wait, have you ever lived in a gated community? Have you lived in one?
I have not. And I feel like I always have to say the disclaimer, this is not based on any place I've lived or any place I've visited. I live in neighborhoods, but they are much larger communities.
Mhm.
And one of the things I was really interested in this community is not just, people who live together all the time, but they also work together. And
Yes.
so it's kind of set in this community where there aren't other industries to commute for other than pretty much this college or the other schools in the area. And so everybody sees all the different layers of each other. And they also are home for the summer for the most part, which is when this takes place.
Yeah, so you have hierarchy at the college, and then you have people in the neighborhood, and then you have the people who died whose home cannot be sold. I really like that part too. And there's also no one else can sell their home because they're in the community where the person was killed. So as a result, all the real estate values are in a toilet. Nobody's in a really good mood about that. And they're all watching out for one another as a result. Like, okay, what did really happen? The book also takes place over 11 days. So what did you do to make sure the tension was there throughout the book? Did you like make sure there were these little spikes going along?
Yeah, I thought about, and I usually don't start with plotting beforehand, but as soon as I started going, I could kind of feel what the structure was going to be and that it was going to be broken up by day. And so I did think about, what's going to happen each day. And that really helped the tension, I think, because I
Mhm.
knew certain things were happening each day. Another thing that helped with the tension was using these message boards throughout, because the community uses these message boards to kind of tell things that are coming that maybe the characters aren't talking about face to face, but they're planning a 4th of July party. And you can see that's 2 days away. Like that's coming. They don't want Ruby there. So that was kind of a interesting dynamic to play with. But I knew certain things were going to happen on certain days, which helped form the backbone of this story.
Yeah, that point of where we're going. And then there's this map in the front of the book. I personally love the map. And it shows where the Truetts live, the Truetts who died lived. And then it's got everything, all the other people that are out around it. And so you were seeing where the homes were. You were seeing how they'd walk down to the lake. You were seeing where the roads went in and out. And I was referring back to that a couple of times because it's like who could see whose house from where they were. And I like the fact that people, especially the teenagers, were trying to sneak in under the security cameras.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that, but it was just really, it, it's that way that if everybody knows everybody's business and everybody knows what's going on. And, and it's like, how much do you really know about your neighbors? And especially like last year, okay, as you were writing this book, this was one of the things, oh, they go in and out of the house that way. Oh, here comes the pool people. Oh, and it's all the stuff that you never really noticed or knew before, but you were really more involved in people's lives.
Yeah, it was actually, I feel like this seems like the type of book I would have written
Yeah.
during a pandemic where, I was writing this primarily when I was not leaving my neighborhood and most of my neighbors were not leaving our neighborhood. And so it wasn't just that you saw each other kind of after work hours or getting the mail, but it was also like the time where you really depended on your neighbors and they were the people that you could still kind of see and ask for help if you needed something. But it was an idea I came up with before the pandemic. I started it the fall before, but I
Wow.
ended up writing the majority of it in that spring and summer. And it felt like the themes I'd been thinking about were just pulling even tighter as I was kind of also within my neighborhood. Yeah, it was interesting to be writing it during that time.
You're just going to drop this in everybody's mailbox and say, hey, it's just such a quiet place around here. Let's see what happens. So Harper narrates the book, and we're captured from her point of view. Was that purposeful? Like you wanted us to be seeing this is what Harper's thinking about everything? And Harper, just to be clear, is the person who Ruby comes back to stay with. This was her roommate. Like,
Yes.
hi,
So
welcome back. I killed people.
yeah, she just walks right in like it's still her home, without giving anyone a heads up. She just comes right back like nothing's amiss. And so no one really is sure what is Ruby's purpose here. Is she here for revenge? Is she here because she's trying to prove her innocence? Like, what is she here for? Or is she here just to taunt us? And so I wanted to have the main character not be sure. And I like to write from that perspective, that you're kind of discovering things alongside this
Mhm.
character as it goes. And so Harper is put in this position where she is the only one who's able to kind of piece together every bit. And so, she talks about at the start, as Ruby's walking down the street, kind of the piece of evidence that came from each house. And I had kind of drawn that out in the map as well when I was starting, which helped me, but I didn't want to have all the information available. I wanted
Mhm.
it to be like, you can see things one way, but then if something shifts or you find this other piece, like, how does it change that whole story that you were creating from the evidence?
And you think that okay, you think you know this character and her children, but do you
Yeah.
really? But you know something that's happened to her. I'm not going to give anything away, but you don't know the whole story there. And at one point, she turns into the neighborhood, and we see it for what it is, a place where, for a group who has appreciated a certain aesthetic, a certain lifestyle. I feel like people see a place like this for what they want it to be. Like they want it to be the safe, wonderful. I mean, it's the kind of place where there are a lot of communities like this in Georgia and North Carolina. I will say that. And it's like, oh, it's the idyllic experience. Come and live here. You can't get through the gate. You can't do this, that, the other thing. And are you selling people on an ideal, or is that really what it is?
Right. And I think, like you were saying, everyone in this neighborhood, even, we're only kind of seeing the surface level
Mhm.
of what was happening at each house too. Like you were saying, you think you know these people next door, but what's really the story behind it? That's something that I'm just drawn to over and over in all settings, especially in suspense and thrillers and small towns in general, and then neighborhoods taking off of that. It's like these people move there for a reason. It's beautiful. It's idyllic. I love living in a place like a small town as well. And then suddenly something shifts your perspective of that, and what is the experience actually like,
Mhm.
when everything is not kind of service level fine.
Mhm. And it's the kind of thing also that people who have been there a long time
Mhm.
remember the time that happened at the Truetts house, remember. And so they have their own narrative on what happened 18 months ago, or was probably even longer ago, before she was convicted. And they have their own narrative about what's going on. And she comes back with nothing.
Yeah.
She really comes back. And then immediately she has a feeling that Harper should be buying her clothes, because Harper threw her stuff out. I mean, I really love that moment. She just got rid of it. She figured she was in jail for all these years. Just get rid of everything. So she was like, well, you threw my stuff out. Like, you sort of owe me. You owe me new clothes. And it's just this very interesting dynamic between the two of them of, what are you really doing? There's times that I'm not going to give anything away, but at times I thought that somebody else was like, okay. I was also extremely amused by Hollow's Edge community page, and you so captured what happens on one of these neighborhood announcement pages. There is news, and then there's some smart aleck chiming in something completely like offbeat and irrelevant, but perceived to be witty. And did you write those later, or did you write those as you were writing the book? Because some of them are just so funny. The character sits there and says something completely off topic, and they're like, "Stop! Like, you're not allowed to do that."
So I didn't start out, like, I started with Ruby coming home and I wrote that section. And then very early on, I knew I wanted to have this entire cast of characters. And I was trying to think about, how can I show this whole cast of characters? And it takes that idea of the things that you're not saying face to face,
Mhm. Yep.
but are still thinking. And so pretty early on, I knew I wanted to incorporate message boards. And I went back and I wrote the first one where they see her coming home, and you can kind of see they're peering out the window, and did anyone know she was coming back here? And why didn't she tell us? And then I wrote them as I went. So at the
Oh.
start of each day, I would kind of thinking about what's coming up. And I thought, not only was it a kind of fun way to show like the character personalities, but also to show the different levels of this neighborhood. Like, they're planning a neighborhood watch in one post, and literally right below it, they're planning their 4th of July party, like who's bringing what. And it's like they want to kind of keep appearances, on the one hand, but also think they can control like their safety, like you were saying, it's the perception of safety. So
Right.
Those were something I really enjoyed writing. And I did write them, except for the first one, pretty much in the order that they appear.
Well, I just think it's really funny too, because somebody's saying like, I'll bring lemonade. Lemonade is already taken care of. Like, you're like, don't bring lemonade.
Yes.
In our town, we have a lot of people who move out who haven't lived in this, like they lived in the city. So they come out here and they'll go like, what is this animal? And someone will go, squirrel. Like, it's like, and then somebody said the other day, I hear something in the attic and they said, who should I call? And somebody, all these people are giving like the company's calling, somebody says Ghostbusters. So, like
Yeah.
I know the voices that end up happening when you throw yourself out there and you're just going to like ask questions and you totally captured like what those people are like. I don't know. They're good for crowdsourcing, but these people have taken on these roles of vigilantes. And
Yeah.
I just love these would be the first people to call the police, but now they're also going to be the neighborhood watch team. And you have to sign up to go out and you have to patrol for these ridiculous hours around this community where there's just not that many people, and you're going to find something, like you're going to find the killer outside by yourself. But I know this is what happens. And did you have fun setting up like vigilante in the burbs mentality?
It was, I think, it was interesting to think about because on the one hand, you are, as a writer, putting people out into the night and these people are out there. It's a different neighbor every night. You hear something out there and you can think, uh, maybe it's Ruby. Oh no, but Preston was supposed to be on watch tonight. So you kind of are always having those dynamics. And it was also interesting to think about which characters would do what when they're out there at night. I mean, you have somebody who's a new mom who's like, well, I'm up anyway. I'll take one. And I'm like, really, you're taking a night on watch? And then you have somebody who had been a police officer who was kind of involved in the initial conviction, and you have people who really don't like Ruby, and you have people who are more forgiving. And so thinking about that when each person is set out at night, but is also sort of vulnerable out there alone, and
Right.
that you're basically also telling everyone. I mean, it's on their message board. Here's who's out there each
Hmm.
night, and here's what you can expect. Yeah.
And here's what they're going to do. And I also did love, though, the one moment when it says, come over and take care of the baby. Am I being paid? The teenager
Yeah.
says, I just loved it because that would be exactly what would happen is, am I getting paid for this? If not, I'm not coming. Like, I'm not interested in doing it. So it's your dialogue among the people was very realistic of exactly what would happen in all these scenarios, because nobody would sit there and go, oh, let me rush over and take care of the baby. No, that's a Little House on the Prairie, not this book.
Well, and everyone's been pushed to the extreme at this point. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like the facades are totally cracked, so it's no longer necessarily, just helping each other out. It's what's really happening here.
And it's also not like, okay, now we have the people who were murdered, or that we have their house, and now we've got the killer back. Oh, we're never selling our houses. Like, we're
Right.
totally stuck. It's like we have to live here for like forever.
Yeah, it almost was the place they want to go to, and now it's literally inescapable because you can't sell. You're stuck
Right.
there. Yeah.
Right. And Ruby has been exonerated, supposedly, but
Mhm.
readers still wonder about her. You still wonder, and there are a lot of little nuggets of really what did Ruby do, because she's
Mhm.
still so secretive of what's going on. And it makes you think that those who are released, like I think there's also something you're talking about here is somebody's innocent, they're released, but they're made to feel like this. And it was a very big social commentary to me in a
Mhm.
lot of ways about what happens. Was that always intentional? Was it something that you felt more as you were writing?
Yeah, it was intentional. I think it did develop as I was writing, but I watch a lot of suspense and true crime. And, you kind of reach the end of this resolution and it feels like it's resolved. And in a way, you think to yourself, well, it's only just beginning, because what really happens to these people who were a part of it and dragged into it or suspected or even, convicted before something was overturned. It doesn't end there. And so I was thinking when I came up with this idea that it was almost going to be a story about what happens next,
Mhm.
the aftermath, like the crime has occurred, the person has been convicted, but the story's just kind of beginning again because
Mhm.
people have their preconceived notions. They've already made their decisions about
Mhm.
her, and how do you overcome that? um, and if somebody is treating you that way, how do you respond?
And they
Ruby's
actually,
not a
a lot,
shy person.
no, no, and a lot of these people were at the trial. Like a lot of these
Yeah,
people testified against her and they testified and said something. And it's really interesting because Harper feels that Ruby felt one way about her testimony and what she said. And one of the neighbors tells her, no, that's not what she said to you when you walked off the stand. And the whole book, she's been thinking that this one way, and we're not giving anything away, but she sees it one way and somebody sees another. So once again, doubts are seeded
right.
of who, and I think in the whole book, you're saying who really knows what's
Yeah.
going on, who really knows, and you really don't know, you know?
Right. And like it's the idea that no one person can really see everything or even every intention, and that, you have one interaction and then somebody tells you actually this was the
Mhm,
context of it, and it
mhm,
changes your entire perspective and
mhm.
your feeling of that relationship too. So yeah,
And
something
she
I'm
said,
really
like,
interested in.
that was the question? That's what they said?
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
saw exactly what they said. And then it becomes these two people, well, who was right? Just because this other person said they heard it or they saw
Right.
that, who's right? So there's a lot throughout the book. It's like, well, wait a second, my head got flipped again of like, what's going on? I know you've said that you don't usually know how your books are going to end when you start
Mhm.
writing. You really don't know. And I saw an interview a couple of weeks ago that you did with your editor, and she said at one point she called you and she said, "Do you know how this is going to end?" And you said, "No, but like I'll get there. I'll get there." And I just think like what it must be like with Mary Sue, who I know as your editor, calling and going, "Do we know how this is going to wrap? Like it's going a good place, but where are we going to be at the end of this thing?" So. Do you worry when you can't see the end, or do you know, I'll get there eventually?
Oh, absolutely. There's a part that I start to panic, right? I think, but then I think, okay, I'm channeling that panic into my story here. And it depends, like some, but I also feel like there's the ending, like the aha moment, but there's also lots of little shifts in perspective along the way or reveals. And so I'll usually know some of them. And I feel like as long as I can see in this book, there's something that happens halfway that I knew early on. And so I felt completely confident that I will figure out the second half as I'm writing the first half.
Right.
It did happen. That's not always the case. I have gotten very far into some books where I've even gotten a complete draft and realized, oh, wait a minute. So I feel like I have to build a lot of revising time into the process, but I feel like and in this book, you have like a very set cast.
Mhm,
And I love this idea that, everyone can have a motive, everyone's a possibility, but like who's the one who actually has that motive that takes them the step closer and the step closer and the step closer until they do something.
mhm,
And I can't see that until I write them and get
mhm.
to know who they are at the core. But yeah, I imagine Mary Sue's face sometimes on the other end of the phone, like, oh no. But I think I've come to accept that that is part of my process.
Yeah, and that's the
Um,
night she's drinking. You just send the wine is coming out. You're like the wine is being pulled out because like I don't know where this is going. Because you think about how much faith the editor has to have that the author is going to deliver, like deliver a finished book in a set amount of time that they can then do something with either editing wise or but to hear like I don't know if we have the ending, but I'll get there. It'll be fine. But I just picture some night like you're making dinner and you're like spooning food out for your kids and it's like you're just putting it like, mom, I'm done. I'm done. And it's like, no, I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking of what I'm going to do, you know?
yeah. And it sometimes happens like that. Like it's not at the computer. Sometimes it's just out there and all of a sudden I'm like, I've got it. And it's sometimes I feel like it's not that I don't have any idea. It's that I'm juggling two
Mhm.
possibilities
Yeah.
and figuring out which is the right path. Yeah.
Right. Right. Way to go. Well, it's really funny because I used to spend time, I used to fly places. I remember those days we used to go to like convention. I remember those days where you went to LA 3 times in 5 weeks. Remember that time? And that was really rough. Now it sounded like paradise. But I used to get some of my best thinking done on an airplane or when I was someplace like that where there was like you only had what was with you. There was no other distractions. And this year, there's been like a billion distractions about every single thing you do. And there are times when I leave the house, like I do leave, as my son says, you don't leave enough, but you have to leave the house and you start realizing, oh, wow, I can actually think beyond sitting in a room. Like I used to joke that I couldn't do yoga at home because halfway through I'd be up and making the bed. Like I would just get up out of the yoga thing and just, but it's almost like you have to move your head. I feel like over
Yeah.
the last year, especially to be doing this, because normally the kids would be at school or, things would be happening on a different pattern. And now it's like, I need the ending for my book. Oh, and dinner. Oh, and
Yeah.
homeschool.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was a little different. Yes.
It definitely was. And, I'm glad I had started this
Mm,
before because
right.
I feel like having that foundation helped a lot because I mean, there was a very long period of time where I found it's very hard to get into that headspace of getting
Hmm.
deep into this world without the distractions of all these things that are happening in our real world right now.
Right.
So that was definitely important that I kind of had the foundation beforehand, but it was a shift of like, grabbing hours earlier before everyone's up.
Yep.
And just
You
kind
used
of
to write nine
shifting.
to three. Yeah, you
Right.
were like the 9 to 3 writer, and now it's like, well, I got to be done before they get up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a totally different feeling. I love this series of lines in the book. We were good people with bad intentions, or bad people with good intentions. We imagined ourselves judge and jury, protectors of our community, turned ourselves into monsters, to murderers. We became the very thing we feared. And I just really love that line. And there's lots to unpeel there. Is that something you wrote towards the end, or something that you knew earlier that you were going to say about these people?
So that I love that you said that because that is my favorite part of the book. And it was actually, like I said, I don't know the plot necessarily that I'm working toward, but I know the character arc or the themes, and that I knew very early on. And that was something I wrote and kind of kept in a side document, like this is a place I want to get to. And that was on my mind
Mhm.
throughout this story that I was writing. And I just love that that's what you kind of picked too.
Well, I feel like that could have been like the promotion line for this book, could have been this series of lines of what happened, because that's exactly what happened in this community. Like she
Mhm.
came back and these are the things that happened in
Yeah,
this town. And you also wonder if these people will ever be the same. Like if
right.
who's going to move? You try to figure out who's going to move first, or what's going to happen next, because what happened will have reactions. There will be things that will happen. 4th of July is never going to be the same. Things are never going to be the same in that community, and it's got scars on it. But also, to live in that community, you want to work at the college. Like it's this really insular, I don't know, you
Yeah.
really set it up.
And if everyone kind of plays a role in this conviction, and to them it's nothing they did wrong. It's like, everyone has like, well, just a little thing, and they all have to kind of sit with what that actually like it might seem like a small part,
Mhm,
but it all kind of leads collectively to the same thing.
mhm.
So I don't
And
think
Ruby's
anything's
not lovable. It's not like she came back and anybody's really cheering her on. I mean, even Harper is terrified of her because she doesn't know what she's going to do at any moment. When she leaves the house, she's sneaking around trying to see what she did and see what she can learn about her. So there's no super comfort level with her. Like she's
yeah.
back. Ooh.
And I think that's what made her an easy person for them to be okay with, or wanting to say, oh yes, Ruby, I saw her on the camera, it must be Ruby, because she never was someone who kind of seemed like the rest of them with going along with the facade. Like she was very happy to shake things up and see what
Mhm,
happened. She was a very
mhm.
different type of personality.
And she sort of like insulated herself into Harper's life. Harper had something happen and she's, oh, I can be there for you. But did Harper really need that? Like, you've got to sit there and like analyze that kind of perspective too, is you're there because you want to be there. It's not exactly for her, good. It's for your own.
Right, right. I mean, it seemed like at the time that they both needed someone. Harper was left in a hard spot when her fiance leaves her in the past, and it's right at the time when Ruby's father, moves away after retiring, and she had gone to the college and wanted to stay. And so she's like, "Oh, look, here's something that benefits both of us." But is it all that it seems?
Yeah, and it's not what and it's also Harper's in such a rough point at that point
Mm,
that yes,
right.
company does feel really, really good. And also it was the whole thing with Harper's fiance is out with everybody in the neighborhood talking about her before he leaves. So
Yeah.
it's really, you get this incestuous kind of neighborhood and what they did for each other, like at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yeah.
Ooh, like really. So how do you come up with character names? How did you come up with the, Harper, Ruby, especially Ruby Slippers? There we go.
I know. So usually I gravitate towards names that I love and didn't use for my own kids. And that was definitely Harper is one of those names. Usually my narrators are just names I like. And Ruby is one of those characters where very rarely they kind of come fully formed, like
Mhm.
with their name. And that was like the first line of the book I came up with was, there was no party the day Ruby Fletcher came home. And I don't know why her name was Ruby. That is one that just kind of came to me. The rest of them, especially with it being a close-knit neighborhood and a large cast, I did try to have them each have like distinct names,
Yeah.
that they're not having names that sound too similar. I try not to have the same initials for the most part. So there were characters names that shifted throughout the story if
Mhm.
they seemed too similar.
Yeah, they seem too similar because you would be completely confused.
Yeah.
Be completely confused. So Rebecca Ross once again narrated the book. She's done
Mhm.
5 of your adult titles. I feel like she's the voice of the Megan, Megan Miranda
Yes.
characters. What about her narration works for you? Because clearly, you have a say in, who's going to narrate the books. What do you like about her voice?
Oh, I just really connect to the way she tells the story. I feel like she captures because I tell the story in first person. And so when she's reading the story, you're hearing that character. And I feel like she really captures all of those dimensions of, you know, I think the main characters often have a lot of layers to them.
Mhm.
And they are people who in different situations can do different things and they have a past. And I just to me, when I hear her voice, it sounds like the character
Right.
speaking as
Right.
well. I think she juggles all of those elements really, really well.
Yeah, she's just, and her voice, she changes the voice. She does,
Yeah.
it's just, she's one of those people I would like to interview at some point because she does such a good job. I interviewed a couple of narrators a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago for a book festival. And it was
Mhm.
just so interesting to hear how they get into what they were doing, how they were then recording in a closet because there was no other place to do it. And just the way it's a craft. It's
Yeah.
absolutely a craft. And she's really nailed the craft of speaking your characters'
Yes.
voices. So at the same time, we've got The Last House Guest is being developed as a television series with, let me get this right, Dakota and Elle Fanning's Llewellyn Pictures and
Mhm.
MRC Television. So where are they in this process, which is like such great news? I can picture that book.
Oh, I'm so excited about this. I feel like it's just in the best hands. We are still in the development stage. There is a great writer who's been working on, um, you know, turning it into a pilot, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for more news soon. But I'm so excited to kind of see what they do with it, because I do feel like there's such different mediums. It's fascinating to see how you turn that into a series, and it's been really interesting to hear kind of the questions the writers had about thinking about themes and just kind of keeping the heart of
Mhm.
that story and the friendship dynamic at the center.
At the friendship dynamic and also how the houses are all situated, how
Yeah.
everything happens there. Because once again, it's a neighborhood, it's like a closed neighborhood in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So as a result, like, how are you going to do that over a long period of, I mean, we want seasons,
Right.
like,
Right.
and now it's come that we don't just want this, we want seasons of the show, and it's, oh, why don't you just use part of the book and then we'll pick up later on of what's ending up. It's very funny to see what's going on these days because
Yeah.
it never, like, it wasn't like that before. It was just, oh, we're going to make this for television. It's going to be a movie. No, now
Right.
it's, and how they take the idea and then paste it completely differently than you would in a book.
Yeah. And it's like, I think TV is like you're expanding the world. And so it's
Mhm.
incredible to think about all these things that are happening off the page to all these other characters that maybe weren't at the heart of, the main story at the first.
Well,
Yeah.
it's things that are visual, like there are cars on
Mhm.
the street. What do the cars on the street look like? What do the houses look like? Okay, we know that some of the houses there have beach houses, but which, like, what colors? What's going to pick up well on screen? And all these things that you just don't normally think about. You're just not,
Right.
normally in your realm of, conversation. So it's still in like early development stages of like writing. Now, do you see everything along the way? Do you see scripts or?
I I don't see everything. I haven't seen the finished yet, so we'll see. Yes.
Mhm. That'll be really fun. Really,
Yeah.
really fun. So where are you on writing the next book? Do you have the ending?
I do have the ending because I finished a draft.
He stole my heart. He
I
stole
know.
Marisu's heart. Marisu,
Yeah.
no resuscitation needed. Oh my gosh, this is great. Okay. So the
Yeah.
first draft is already done. Wow, this is early for you. Is it early?
Yeah, I think my last one was a little late.
Okay.
So this is kind of getting closer to, ideally, I like to have a first draft done before a book comes out.
Mhm.
That wasn't the case last year. This year I turned in a draft the day before publication of Such a Quiet Place. So it's kind of
Okay.
get close. But yeah, so it's still kind of, just the first draft, but
Right.
I'm excited. Yeah.
And then from there, do you feel like you have to mold more of like, when you do a first draft, is it a messy first draft or are you pretty clean on what's going on?
It depends on the part of the draft. I feel like the first half of my draft is pretty clean because I don't do a lot of upfront plotting and I rework things as I go. My first half is just a lot cleaner because it's been reworked, and you're thinking about the foundation and making sure all those pieces are in place as
Mhm.
you're figuring out what's going to happen in the second half. So generally, I feel like my first halves of my drafts are pretty clean, but so much of it is also like sometimes I turn in a draft and I feel like the structure is right. This was the right way to tell the story, which was the case in Such a Quiet Place and The Girl from Widow Hills. But sometimes it takes me several drafts to figure out the right way to tell a story. The
Mhm.
Last House Guest, I wrote probably 4 or 5 complete drafts of figuring out the right way to tell the story. What's the heart kind of at the center? What's the right structure? So it's hard to know up front, is this going to be something that I revise once or twice, or is this something that you revise 5 times?
Does it get easier? I mean, this is, I think, your fifth adult book. Does it get easier as time goes on to know you've got it or you don't? Like, are there sometimes it's like, I know I'm gonna have to rework that, but I'm just gonna keep going. Does it, but it's gonna be there. You know you can do it after you've done it before, or is it still that panic of, I don't know if I can do this?
I'd say it's a little of both because I think, like you were saying, the confidence comes with having been through it before
Mhm.
and having done the rewrites and knowing that you will get it there. And
Mhm.
so that to me, like I do sometimes feel, okay, this is something that I'm going to have to rework later, like this part right here.
Mhm.
Um, the actual process I don't find any easier
Mhm.
necessarily when you're working on the middle of a first draft is always very difficult for me. I feel like the first draft is the biggest hurdle.
Mhm.
But yes, I feel it's easier only because I have that confidence of, this might not be it, but I know it's part of the process and
Yeah,
it's
it's
going
part
to
of the
get there.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're over that, it's done. You're over thinking that that's done at this point. And it's funny because I think it was Linwood Barkley who said to me that when you wait for notes back from the editor, he said, which is sort of like waiting for tests from the doctor to come back. It's
Yeah.
like, it's benign. Am I dying? Like, what's going
Right.
on? Are we going back to the beginning? What are we going to do here? It's very, very funny. But I said, yeah, I think that would be a good synopsis of what it is. And it's also, at this point, you're also looking at the market because you're also not writing for yourself. You're writing for a marketplace out there. And what is the marketplace looking for, like at this time? Do you have that in mind? Like when you're reading, I mean, you do reread other, books as well. Are you trying to see like, what do we need right now? How can we shift the market or anything?
I don't usually think about that when I'm coming up with it. Maybe I should. I don't usually think about that when I'm coming up with a concept. I feel like there are themes I'm drawn to, and I feel like there are things in the world that kind of influence
Mhm.
maybe the themes you're talking about or, what people are talking about and reading. But I don't usually, especially in a first draft stage, I feel like I try to kind of just think about the story at that
Mhm.
stage. I think those are things that um, play in more in the later drafts. Yeah, but I don't usually start that way.
Don't start that way. So
Yeah.
also this time you've got a remote tour. You're doing a lot remotely, like we're still remote, but you did do a live like signing before your first event in your town. What was it like to see people again coming in and doing like, not doing an event, but just doing the signing?
Oh, it was so exciting. And that was sort of, something we realized we could do just a couple of weeks ago. We had planned everything to be virtual this year, and then suddenly realized, you know, we had planned the event virtual and people had signed up from everywhere, but there were a lot of people in my area too. And we realized, well, we can do the live signing beforehand. People could come pick up their books. And it was so fun. It was just such a great experience to chat with people, to see them, to talk books. So yeah, I'm very excited.
It's gonna be really interesting to see where we go from here. I went to an event last week that was hybrid. Well, I was home and I wasn't live, but there were people in the audience, and I love the way they handled it because the people in the audience were asking questions live, and then they were going to Q&A from people who were not there. And I thought, if it was a really rainy, horrible night, how many people would not go to the store, but they would be able to still watch the event and be able to do this? And I found that was really interesting, you know?
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I'm really curious to see where we go from here and the different ways that we incorporate all of this. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing I've really been thinking, giving a lot of thought to is a lot of thing is on the sale of the book at the
Mhm,
store at the event.
mhm,
And was talking to somebody the other day. I was talking to an agent, and I said, this is really interesting about this, though. If you go to the store to buy the physical book, there are a lot of people who want digital audio or they want
mhm,
ebooks. And that is not taken care of by going to this event.
mhm.
And it's a different way of looking at pre-orders, because if you pre-ordered, you're not ordering the night of the event. So I think that we still have a learn curve here on what to do, because when you think about your sales, I mean, your audio sales used to be like your sales to Finland, and I'm not saying anything bad about Finland, but what I'm saying is there are like not a lot of people that were in Finland buying the book, but now audio is such a huge part of what's going on. And I've been at events where I've watched people in the audience ordering the book, and they said they just don't want physical books in their homes. They've downsized. They don't want this, but they want to read the book. So
Mhm.
how does that count? How does that count into what's going on? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And it's something I think that we'll do thinking about over the next year about how it works on every level. But I do like the hybrid because we did a survey recently on our site, and we realized that close to 40% said that there will never be an author event near their house, like where they
Mhm.
live. It's never going to happen. And you realize what a tremendous opportunity this has been, because I know I watch a ton of events during the week to see a lot of authors and
I agree. Yes. I feel like it's, opened up the boundaries of geography,
Mhm.
and made things so much more accessible.
Mhm. And I also like that you're in conversation with many of your fellow authors.
Yes.
And I think that hearing an author ask questions is different from hearing it from me or someone else in the media, because they know where you were. They like
Right.
know where you were when you couldn't finish the end and things like that. So has that been incredibly fun for you to be seeing your friends that way?
It has been, and I think another, like, benefit of doing things virtually that you don't have to be in the same place as these other authors, that you're able to be in conversation with. So it's been so fun because I'm a huge fan of their books, and
Mhm.
you know, I love hearing about their process, and I love hearing all the different ways we all kind of get to the same point at the end.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that has been so fun and incredible experience.
And there's one author who I followed, I think I did 8 or 9 stops on her tour. And to hear the different authors interview and hear what everybody else brought about the book was so interesting to me, because everybody had a different take on the conversation. So it's not like if you go on the road, your talk that you're going to give, and you get up, if somebody introduces you, they tell something about the book, you give your talk. It's usually the same talk. You're not going to vary this in different, like it's not like Phoenix gets something different than New Orleans gets something different than Charlotte. No, it's the talk. But this other way, you get such a different experience. And there are a number of authors that I've been to many of their talks, and I've learned something different in every single one. So,
I agree. I feel like the things we talk about in each event vary so much more than when I'm just doing, my talk by myself. You're completely right.
yeah. Well, even like, you go to concerts sometimes, you go, oh, that was such a clever line. You realize they said it in Buffalo, Phoenix. Like it's really, really witty. But then when you hear it on the album, you realize that's what they said every night at that moment. And everything in so much of what we do is so scripted. I mean, look, the morning news is scripted, the evening news is scripted. Most of what we're like is nothing extemporaneous is coming out. So if you go on the road, it's either you're going to talk to yourself, like back and forth, like, hello, you didn't, but here you get this dynamic of somebody else who gets it. I know I'm harping on this, but I just feel like it's just such a fun thing, you
It is.
know?
It's fun to be part of. It's fun to watch. Yeah, I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, and you learn so much
Mhm.
because it's like, I never even thought about that perspective.
Yeah.
This morning I was hearing Amor Towles talk about his book, and he was talking about something that he weaves in towards the end of this one that ties into another book. And it's like, it was kind of like magical to just hear these kind of conversations of what's going on. And it makes you look at the book differently, especially if you've read the book, because a lot of times I like to see these things after I've read the book and then hear the author discussing what's going on. And a lot of times when you're at a signing, people are buying the book for the first time. So you really can't talk about bigger themes. You're really trying to talk them into buying the book, as opposed to just talking about the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have a title for next year, or is that still going to be a surprise?
I think that's going to be a surprise because I'm not sure yet. I will admit that usually um, I've submitted books that were just called like book four when I've
Right.
turned it in because a lot of my titles don't stick from the
Right.
very first. Yeah. So this one, when I started writing it, I called it the neighborhood's name because I
Mhm.
called it Hollow's Edge. And then, I was thinking such a quiet neighborhood, such a quiet street. And eventually we got to such a quiet place.
Yeah.
But so it changes. Yeah.
And did you play around with the cover? Did you play around with the cover? What?
I saw a few ideas,
Right.
concepts, and I think everybody like this was one of those initial concepts, and we were all like, "That's it!" Like
It's good.
they nailed it. I love it because I love how like you have that view in. You think you see everything, but you don't really, and you've got the trees like covering the words. It's so eerie and atmospheric. I love it.
Yeah, and I like if even the leaves going over the words and stuff like that. I think it just completely works.
Mhm.
And it's you see like, okay, is that the water? What am I seeing? Is this the road going in? Who are these people? And they're totally scary. But I think that I really just love that everybody is so involved in each other's lives. And when you really think about today, I mean, the other night on our little town message board, they said, somebody says, okay, I just want you to know the kid that if you ring the doorbell, he's on a skateboard and he's trying to sell pest control. So don't answer the door. And it was just really funny. Like this is like this news flash that goes out. And I think you gave us a chance to take a little look at ourselves and say, okay, what is everybody doing these days? Like, is this like super crazy? Yes. I know, but it's also a moment where you can find like some true humor. Last night they announced there's going to be an ice cream truck coming to our neighborhood, and I said, "Oh, is exercise class an hour before? Do let me know."
That's awesome.
So it's like you get to know people in your neighborhood in a totally different way. And believe me, I'm not moving anywhere near these people because they are way inside of each other's lives. And yes, two people can bring lemonade. It's perfectly acceptable. It's not a problem. Megan, as always, it is so much fun to chat with you, and we look forward to seeing Untitled next.
Yes.
Untitled
Thank
next.
you. Yes.
Good
Next
title.
time we talk, hopefully I have a title.
Love
Yes.
a title. Love a title. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, lots of luck with the book and with the rest of your tour.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
And to our readers, look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.